Hi, all. Welcome back to Effective Technology Integration Professional Development Series. I am Rob Dominic, MLTI Ambassador. And this week, topic 5 in this series that we've been doing, we're going to be talking about technology integration and selection. So, the previous few weeks, we mentioned, talking about the different strategies to incorporate technology and how to judge it and to what depth you would incorporate it, talking about the SAMR and then the TIM model and the PICRAD and the Triple E. We talked about the overall teacher profile with technology with a TPAC. Then we had a discussion last week amongst the ambassadors about just bringing all the strategies together and what does that really look like in a classroom realistically. So this week we're going to talk about saying, all right, you've got your technology depth, you've got your strategies in place. Like, what are the routines? How are you actually going to integrate it into the classroom? How does that look like for you? We're going to do some discussion around that and see. All right. So we're going to try to build up your toolbox here of options for routines and other strategies with incorporating that once you've selected the technology and you know what depth you want to use it. So obviously you've got the 4 C's, right? That's kind of been around for a little while now. The 4 C's of 21st century learning: communication, creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking. Right? It gives a solid foundation, of course, right? Making sure that these are incorporated into your lessons, just all around, technology or not, right? A lot of times that this is what we want to be able to have some level of each one of these or one of these somehow. But we're also going to look at technology specific routines that incorporate these concepts, but also are more direct about what you can be doing with technology in the classroom and how it would look like, and suggestions for making that smooth transition with your kids. So we got about 5 of them that we're going to look at here. Modeling, the strategies within modeling, and I'm sure all of this happens in a normal classroom: modeling, co-op, reflection, authentic learning, and feedback, right? All that happens in the classroom, I'm sure, to some degree. It's a matter of just highlighting, what are some top routines, what are some more successful than others that can be suggested here within these categories that you might want to think about and look out for to incorporate in your own classroom to make, the integration of technology more successful. So it's not just there and that's it. How can you get it to be a central part of your learning? So the first one here, modeling. All right, we'll look at that. Few of them that stand out: I do, we do, you do, or any variation of that. That's a pretty common one, almost like a workshop model type deal. So you want to be able to have that gradual release while students go and work on their own. That's kind of that's almost a standard model of, here, I'm going to demonstrate, kind of like a tech walkthrough as well. These are very similar in my opinion. Tech walkthrough might be part of the I do, we do, you do sequence here. And again, there could be a variation of this. I know in math class, it's been talked about that maybe you do a you do, we do, I do, or some sort of variation of that, because that way you're not just you're letting the kids think on their own to begin with. You're not just boxing them into what you were thinking or your suggestions. You're letting them bring their own knowledge in first. But again, whatever variation works for you. Think aloud, right? Modeling the think aloud, so students can hear what's going through your mind. What are some things to consider? How should that look? And then, of course, the check for understanding, that kind of goes with the modeling as well. Again, with the technology, I think that one really helps to make sure that students understand what they're doing with the technology, what the features are of it. Again, combine that with a tech walkthrough, what they can do with it, so that way they know how creative they can dig into it with, all of that. Right? Those are just some highlighted ones. And obviously there's a lot more that could go out there, but I think these ones really stand out when you're using technology with the modeling piece. A couple things always to watch out for, though, okay, with the modeling: snow plowing and then the pacing. Again, with technology, Snow plowing, in my, that to me, that's where you're just kind of making them aware of all the issues ahead of time or as much as possible, and you're trying to just pave the way for them completely, push everything out of the way, so they don't encounter any obstacles or as minimal obstacles as possible. Um, I understand that, right? That's good intentions, but that might not always be necessary, especially with technology. Sometimes it helps for kids to kind of figure things out on their own, and there's always going to be plenty that they come up with or problems that they encounter that we can't anticipate all the time as teachers. So, watch out for doing too much of the snow plowing. I'm sure a little bit's fine. That's what the tech walkthrough is for, right? You're not going to leave them completely on their own, but don't go so every obstacle is pushed out of the way for them. And then the pacing, right? That's another big thing with technology in the classroom is, understanding the pacing at which you are having them work on things that you're modeling, right? Through this, what your pacing is. You don't want to take forever going over something, but at the same time, you don't want to just have a quick overview and then they're lost once they get in there. You got to find that middle ground here with the pacing. So those are two big things I think that modeling can fall into if you're not aware of it. The next piece here, and this co-op I had over here with this, the co-op had this little light bulb star, check mark, and then the feedback as well. Because yes, they're part of a lot of routines normally in the classroom, but I think that these two need their own separate focus. They need to be highlighted when you're using technology. And obviously, I'll talk about the feedback one in a little bit. But the co-op, especially, I think you need to make sure that we are considering that when we're using technology, because too often, right, we can run into that rut of having technology worked on in isolation. You're like you tell them, all right, go work on your devices, and go check out this document I've sent you, and then you're working on your own. And we think that the engagement that the technology brings is enough, because they are more engaged a lot of times. So we're like, oh, why do we need to have cooperation of any sort? And it gets them stuck in isolation at times. So we need to be conscious of that and really try to have some routines where they might be able to have the opportunity to collaborate with somebody, right? Whether it's you or the class or pairs, whatever it may be, right? So a few of these strategies here, right? The turn and talk, just have them be able to take a moment in class, pause. Hey, update your partner. Where are you on your project? What are you doing right now? What's your plan? Talk it through. All right, you can do that. Think, pair, share, very similar, right? Sharing out to the whole class though instead, or maybe they're collaborating together and that's their pair part, and then they're sharing out. Co-create, that's a big one, right? Why not be able to have them co-create whenever possible? Have them work in pairs, maybe trios. Again, I don't like to go beyond trios at times because then it kind of falls apart with the teamwork piece, unless you're going to use some team roles here, right? That's another piece. If it is bigger than 2 or 3, use some team roles so people have their jigsaw type setup where they bring their own part to the team, and they can focus on that and then bring it all together. But right, those are kind of simple ways to be able to incorporate it. Nothing else. My all else fails. I don't have a big cooperative learning piece ready. Have them turn and talk. Discuss what's going on. Right. Have that collaboration piece. And all of these, if you're doing them together or as much as you can, you've got the fact that it will support questioning, reflection, further creativity, teamwork, problem solving, all those soft skills that come with technology, and those soft skills that a lot of other classes or employers, whatever you want to look at it as, that they appreciate, because it's not easily measured, right? And those are all the pieces that are kind of byproducts of doing cooperative learning, or working together to co-create things like that. You can always dig down deeper into your thought process or get more creative as a team when you're bouncing ideas off of each other. So yeah, keep that in mind. Keep that cooperation in mind when you're having kids use technology. As simple as just talking about what's going on or a group project, whatever it may be. All right, the next piece here, another box here, reflection. Certainly reflection is one of the biggest ways for students to be able to learn, right? With this, visible learning data here by John Hattie. But there's effect sizes that he studied for learning, and to see the impact of what certain categories had on the overall learning experience. Did it have a large impact? Did it have a small but positive impact? Was it a negative impact? There's a table here of it. It's kind of interesting. You go through and you see, what had the biggest impact here with the effect size going up. Right here you've got 0.53 of concentration, persistence, and engagement, and that's a higher one. I mean, 0 is your neutral. Above 0, a little bit above 0 is a small positive. The higher you get, like 0.5 and above, right, it's got this potential to accelerate, it says. Other places likely to have a positive impact. That's a 0.38. So it's got these tiers to it. And the higher you get, the more acceleration and the larger the impact it has. And reflection, self-reflection, I think it's down in the S is down here. If I alphabetize that, it's down here in the self-judgment and reflection, 0.75, right? Potential to considerably accelerate. That's a big one. It's one of the biggest ones on there, right? If we sort that by the effect size, you can see here what the largest ones are. The highest this one goes up to is 1.46. Jigsaw method, that learning co-op that we talked about before, that has a large effect size. But anyways, reflection has a big effect size, right? That's when people learn a lot, usually, is when they reflect upon their work, they get feedback. Again, that goes with a cooperative piece, right? All these can't be completely in isolation. And it helps. It really helps them learn about what to adjust for next time and what they could do better. And it comes from themselves, and what better way for them to carry that skill with them than to have them practice it and reflect themselves as they go through school, and have that innate feeling of how they performed. So ways to have that, right? Visual representations. So we're talking about graphic organizer, mind maps, making animations to represent things that they're learning, right? Give them a different way of understanding what's going on and how they're learning it. I know this can be helpful in math as well. If students are just learning about abstract concepts in math, and they're just learning about linear equations and blah blah blah, right? It doesn't really mean that much. You start throwing out that math jargon, it doesn't mean as much to them. But if you give them a visual, if you have graphs or you have situations that they can represent with those linear equations, then it becomes more impactful learning with that. Prior knowledge, making connections, right? That's another way for them to be able to reflect, and a routine or a skill that you can bring into the classroom. Have them elicit that prior knowledge, or have them make connections to the learning. Where have they seen this before? What could they talk about, in their report that they're making? How can they relate to it? Goes a long way as well for engagement. Justification. So, justify their thinking. How did it change? I like this, right? I used to think whatever, but now I think this new piece. Have them justify why. Where did that change come from? How, have them be that metacognition. Have them understand that process and that reflection piece that brings out those change in thinking and why it happened, and really dig into their thoughts. Right? Student self-reflection starters. These are good suggestions here. Actually, comes from some staff here at the DOE, Pam Buffington, that does some work as well. She does a lot with GeoGebra training and such, I know. But you can read through this scenario, what was done. But if nothing else, they've got some good suggestions here about sentence starters for reflection. And this one is a little bit more math centered, but it can all easily be translated to other subjects. Right? I can check my answer, right? That's a math piece. But the strategy I used, I discovered, I noticed that, I wonder, right? Can you tell me how you knew? I agree or disagree because. Did you think about, right? A lot of these can be used in other subjects besides just math, and it's a good database of ones that it can also be used in math as well, which is sometimes the trickier part, honestly. But this goes back to justifying as well, right? It's a combination of that. Have them justify their work, have them understand what they're doing and why. Bring that thought process out. That's going to be much more far-reaching than just pound out your paper or solve the problem and be done and move on. Teacher monitoring. So this is just you, right? You monitoring their work as they go along. Have them explain themselves, right? You can be there to help have them reflect. You can ask them what's going on and why and what are they doing and why do they think about it that way. Draw out the thinking, not just that one's wrong or this one's not right or a good job on that piece. Draw out those questions. Similar as using those sentence starters. Have questions that go along with these. Right. And then finally, tool selection. Make sure that the tools that they're using or that they have access to, they can decide what they would want to use to demonstrate their knowledge. This gives them the way or the ability to reflect on, what tool, what digital tool, what technology piece would be best for me to do this project, or sorry, what do I want to use to be able to show my knowledge in this subject? That's a simple way of having them reflect upon their own learning. They're like, oh, I want to be able to use Google Slides because I want to make animations that show what I learned about, or I just want to make a Canva, poster or Powtoon. I want to, they can choose. Give them a selection. Don't overload them with choices. Give them whatever, a few 3 to 5, where they can select the tool that they think would be best to represent the knowledge that they want to display or to demonstrate about the subject. Right? And again, that they would be going through the reflection process in that selection. Okay. Next, and then authentic learning. Now, this one, of course, I think this one's applicable big time outside of using technology. But to me, whenever I'm using technology in the classroom, I feel like it's even more imperative that I have something authentic tied to it. Like it's giving me this big opportunity to have some sort of authentic piece or real world piece that I'm incorporating in the learning. And I feel like I need to use that if I'm using technology. I need to find a way to incorporate it, have it a real life situation or tools that they can use, like Google Earth and Google Maps, that they can use some authentic learning and some actual data, real life images when learning about it. So, excuse me, involve real world issues. Again, that's can be a common one, even without technology. But with it, try to draw that in with images or again activities that involve like everyday life. You can incorporate local communities if needed, right? If there's something going on that you can contact and get information about in the community, and they can apply that to their learning. You can have them connect with people through technology, communicate. Again, share media somehow. They can bring that in through the technology. Google Maps and Google Earth. I incorporate that one directly because I think that's often overlooked. There's lots you can do with that, with making them, even in math, finding area or perimeter, things like that of land, and plotting things out. Obviously, social studies and geography, you can draw that in. ELA, you can be making what are they, like a story travels. I forget the exact name for it right now, but literary travels where they map out places in a book they can find, and they can make pins on there and describe what's going on and how it looked like in the book. What the plot was, what the significance of that area was in the book. Make the task interactive, right? That's another bonus for for using technology, bring it to life. That's more of authentic learning, having them interact with it instead of just passive piece, going back to our depth of integration from before. And in reality, when it comes down to it for me, again, thinking in terms of math piece, non-theoretical. Non-theoretical means like I want to bring situations to students that just aren't the pie in the sky, hard to hard hard to conceptualize or hard to represent um, using the technology, because if they're just still doing all these things, of here's the sales for a random business that you're going to plot, um, that's not really authentic. That's not really engaging for them. It's very theoretical, and why not have them actually make it more concrete by creating that business piece and making a business plan for themselves about what they would do, or quite simply like looking up cell phone plans and going into a Google spreadsheet and plotting, or writing the equations for the different cell phone plans so they can compare them. Things like that, where it's real life for them, and it's applicable to everyday life as opposed to just theoretical situations that they get desensitized by, especially by the time we get to middle school. They don't really have that, like, they don't really have that awe to it anymore of, like, look what I can do with this stuff. It's they've been there, done that. It's all stuff that doesn't apply to them. They don't really want to. They don't really have as much motivation to dig into it. All right. Feedback. So this was one of the other ones in the boxes that was kind of highlighted here, because again, feedback is most likely commonplace with regular classroom assignments, without using technology as much. But I feel like feedback can sometimes get lost in the shuffle with using technology, um, because it's not just writing on the paper that you're returning to the student, and putting in pen and paper to them. It's got to have some other way of communicating with the student to make it work. Um, so some suggestions or some ideas for the feedback piece. Moat is a really good one. It's a audio feedback that integrates with websites and all of the Google Workplace products. So you can have it on a Google Slide or a Google Doc, and you can make voice comments. You can have it in Google Classroom actually as well, and you can make voice comments to the students so they can hear you respond to them. And obviously, it's going to be quicker as well when you can voice your feedback as opposed to writing it. So that's a really handy one. I have it up here on my browser as an extension because it does work with websites as well. So if I go to this other website and I click the moat, I can make a voice comment on this website and it gets sent to the student. Again, that can be something else if you have questions about, we can dig into. Google Classroom, of course, right? That's the work management system. So that has its own feedback piece where you can type and respond or use Moat. But it also has a comment bank in Google Classroom that you can make sure you use as well to help with your efficiency of feedback, because that's the piece with feedback. It's right. It's got to be timely. It's got to be ongoing. It's got to be consistent. And that makes it real for the students that way. Giving them feedback days later, a week later or so, it doesn't really mean as much for the students anymore. They've moved on. You've probably moved on with things. Yeah. And then look for technology tools that have built-in resources, right? They have built-in like feedback systems. There's a few that come to mind. I'll mention the next slide as well. But like Pear Deck has a way that you can leave feedback for students on each slide that they are working on. IXL, there's a way to make comments to students as they're working and give them feedback. So look for resources that have that option on it, and so it can make it a little bit more mainstream with the feedback as opposed to waiting for a Google Classroom comment or maybe not even getting a chance to give a feedback, especially if it's in the moment, right? Pear Deck, IXL, Desmos, those can have in the moment feedback to students, which is obviously even more impactful than just waiting even longer. And then, of course, the in-person monitoring, right? Your kids are using technology with something. They're using it to complete a project or an activity, and you can just be around and you can work your way around and talk with them. You can give them feedback as they're working, which is probably happening anyways. But I don't want to overlook that idea of it because it's obviously very impactful as well. And you can do a combination of that. You can do that, and then you can have a way that you can have students submit their work, and you can give feedback to the ones you didn't get to. If you've got some sort of workshop type setup or stations at your classroom, again, going back to the earlier slide of routines of, that you would have for students in the classroom. Depending on your routine that you're having, you could combine this with some digital feedback for students later on, ones you didn't get to in person. You can have a hybrid of them. But like all things with students, they'll notice what gets them attention, good or bad. So they'll notice if they're doing digital assignments and they're not getting feedback, they're just getting a final grade. One, it's either going to become frustrating to them, or two, they just won't find it as valuable anymore because there's no feedback along the way that they're getting. So again, that goes for technology or not, but it's even more important to use that with technology because of the ease at which it gets lost. So make sure to have that routine somehow, right? It builds that classroom culture where people get feedback. It honors their mistakes. It allows them to be comfortable talking to each other or talking to you. Sometimes you just need to make the emphasis of the mistakes, and let the students own it, right? That becomes the culture of the classroom, and then that becomes productive because they're not afraid to talk to each other anymore or make the mistakes. They're not afraid or offended by your feedback, right? All of that classroom culture affects all of these other pieces that we just talked about making those connections as well. And a lot of it comes from the feedback piece. I know this was the last one on here, but could have been the first one because that's where the connections with the students happen. So some notable resources. Again, there's plenty more out there, but just some ones that kind of help, I think, with all of that process of modeling and feedback and authentic learning and everything. Moat, which we talked about with the audio feedback that you can leave them. Pear Deck and Desmos, they're in the same box here because they're similar in what their capabilities are. And Desmos is a little bit more math-based. You can do other subjects with it, but it's a little bit more math-specific. Whereas Pear Deck can be used almost across the board in any subject. But they both allow feedback. They both allow live monitoring of students' work. They both allow highlighting what students are doing so you can present it and show them what's going on. Similar features. That's why they're in the same box, but really, really helpful ones. Flipgrid, again, across the board. Flipgrid could be used for that discussion. You can have it with audio only if you wanted to as well. Kids don't have to be on camera for their responses. You can have a MP3 version only, and then you can have the class discussion, or you can have them give feedback through that method. So that really highlights what we're just talking about as far as the routines and working together and feedback and creating that class culture. Screencastify, so you're recording, right? They're recording their screens. Again, this is a really good tool across the board for whatever you want them to work on because you want them to explain themselves. Pretty handy for the reflection box, right? If you want students to be able to reflect on their learning or explain what they're doing, Screencastify can be a great way to do that. Flipgrid can do that as well. You can have screen recording with Flipgrid, and that it does limit the time at which students record, so you can set that to whatever you want, 1 minute or 3 minutes or whatever it may be. Whereas Screencastify, the free version, does have a 5-minute limit. But I mean, if you're doing 5 minutes and you've got 100 students, 500 minutes of things to look through, you're talking 8+ hours. That's a lot, and you're not going to have timely feedback at that point, right? You're not going to be able to have timely feedback if you got over 8 hours of video to look through. So anyways, that goes to your routines about how much you want students to record on there, but it does help. I've had assignments before where I've asked the students to summarize how to add and subtract the positive and negative numbers, and they used Screencastify, and they had to keep it to a minute or just over. And they had to kind of know their stuff. So that was the other restriction as well, is that in order to fit it into a minute, they had to rehearse and know their stuff, and keep it concise. So a good way for that as well. Edpuzzle, again, with videos and having students answer questions as they go along, it gives them a chance to, reflect on their learning and answer the questions, and gives you a chance to give feedback so you can see what students are answering, or what they're understanding or not understanding for that matter, so you can address it if needed, individually or with a class. All right, Google Arts and Culture, that's another nice one across the board that you can use in many different subjects. You can obviously have some authentic learning with that piece, and have students go on those virtual field trips. It used to be Google Expeditions, that's been discontinued. There are some other ones out there as well that could work, but this is just one of the bigger ones that they have curated. And then finally, don't forget about the Google Workspace tools, right? Like we talked about, Google Sheets is not used as much. Google Docs are probably used a lot, and Google Slides are probably used a lot. But Google Slides doesn't have to be just slideshows either, right? It could be animated stories. It could be notes. I have a video over here on the MLTI channel somewhere about using Google Slides for notes in math class and making activities with them in math class. So you can make them things interactive on Google Slides. It doesn't have to be just a presentation. But also Google Sheets, I feel, is a neglected tool that can serve as authentic learning experiences. Again, not just for math. Obviously, it does directly have a relation to math, but it could be used in a lot of different ways with the different features that it has. So don't forget about the Google Workspace Suite, which most people, schools or students have access to no matter what. Okay, well, thank you for tuning in this week. As always, if you have questions, feel free to send them my way through here. You've got your form for contact hours on the PDF link in the description of the video here. And for future videos, please check out our MLTI YouTube playlist and actually past videos. But future videos are going to be asynchronous from now on with all of these PD series that we have. They'll be posted each day that we had it set, but you'll be able to go find them on our YouTube playlist instead of waiting for a Zoom meeting to happen. All right. Well, thank you. We'll see you next time.